It's Wednesday, May 14th, 2014, and you're listening to SYN Boldly, the podcast, the Sign Your Name Project. I'm your host, Trey Comstock. With me this week, as ever, is the lovely Stephen Doss.
Hello.
Kathleen Royston is on vacation. On tonight's episode, we will talk about an update that's not all that surprising, but equally saddening in the United Methodist Church, and discuss the proliferation of casual racism and the kind of discussion of race in America. But we start tonight with disappointing and unsurprising news in the news. So we mentioned on last week's show the case of Mary Ann Barkley. She was the woman in the desert Southwest who was applying for ministry, cleared her district committee and ordained ministry, which means normally in the United Methodist Church she would then go to the annual conference's board of ordained ministry. The boom, as we kind of, or other people called it. And so she was not, Board of Ordained Ministry did not interview her, and instead just kicked her straight out of the process, because it had come out earlier in the process that she was a quote-unquote practicing lesbian. No, excuse me, she was an active lesbian, was their language. Sorry. The coded language for sex.
So she ran a lot?
She ran a lot. She went boating, and we made this joke last week, but it never gets old.
Lots of softball was played.
Lots of softball. So that went to the annual conference, and pastors in the annual conference said that she should be reinstated. The bishop said, I'm not going to deal with this. Then the judicial council told the bishop, you have to deal with this. And then the bishop said, okay, well, the Board of Ordained Ministers shouldn't have kicked her out because they never interviewed her, and they have to interview her in order to kick her out. And then that went to the judicial council, and the judicial council last week said, yeah, okay, or a while, not that long ago, but last time we recorded, yeah, okay, do that. And so, finally, she met with her Board of Ordained Ministry at long last. And what they did, she put out a statement through the Reconciling Ministries Network that I'll read a portion of. Today, so I'm quoting from her, today the board voted not to move me forward in my ordination process because they felt I had failed to articulate my understanding of the, quote, lordship of Christ in the world, end quote, the particular role of ordination, and a failure to communicate my, quote, internal call, end quote. Their decision means I will continue my journey for ordination, but, per normal procedure, will have to go back to my district committee, one that has had complaints filed against them for passing me the first time. My sexual orientation never came up in the interview. I can't help but wonder how their perception of my sexuality influenced their thinking. And she has a much longer and beautifully written statement. But that's kind of the core of the matter of what is news here. Is she went before the Board of Ordained Ministry. They decided not to kick her out of the process entirely, which is what they had done previously, but to basically defer her for another go-around, claiming that she had failed to answer some theology questions and failed to express her call, which is something that comes up a lot in these kind of people who often get deferred because they can't express their call. We have both Stephen and I have friends who that's been what they've been deferred for. We've also had friends who were in some way practicing homosexuals, who got kicked out of the process for similar theological qualms about the lordship of Christ or things like this. So this isn't a totally uncommon approach to this, and on the surface of it, it looks like a Board of Ordained Ministry just being the Board of Ordained Ministry.
Right.
But I think her point about how their knowledge of her sexuality, even if it never came out directly, they know, because that's why they didn't interview her the first time around, how that clouded their perception. So what do you think about either her statement or what occurred at all?
Well, I think, that's a good way to look at it, is how does, even though it wasn't overtly said, how did it influence the the situation at hand. For example, when we know something about someone, we form an opinion. It's our nature as human beings. We say this person is this person is X, this person is Y, this person is Z. And it's, throughout this whole thing, it's been established that, she is in a committed relationship with her partner. Wonderful thing. That's great. But it's not a secret. And it's one of those,
right.
I wonder, like she says, I wonder if that, and I'm going to be honest with myself, it probably did.
Sure,
It's probably, how can we make this so that it's her decision she left now?
I mean,
because we tried to do it our way and then we got a black eye. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to say, you need to articulate your call better. And then that is the Board of Ordained Ministry saying we still have the power to say in 2 years' time or 4 years' time, however long it is. It's 2 years, right?
That she has in her...
until she goes back.
Could be... I actually don't know.
Well, whenever she comes back, the Board of Ordained Ministry can say, you still don't have that firm grasp, so we're going to have to...
Well, in a way, it seems like what in politics gets called a pocket veto, right? It's not that often a president won't come out and just veto a law in a very aggressive way. He'll just refuse to sign it until the timer runs out.
Yeah.
And then it doesn't become a law. So in a way... by saying, oh, you have these theological issues you need to work on, and oh, you have these theological issues that you need to work on. They never actually have to come out and say, we're going to kick you out of this process because you're a lesbian. And so it's a way of them saving face and basically trying to torture her out of the process.
Yeah. You can't do this. Your call isn't strong enough that you could get through this process.
Wait, and that seems weird, because she's going for deacon's orders, right?
Yeah.
And so each of the orders have their own rigors, and for the deacon's orders, I've always understood that the call story is not the bit where you need to be rigorous. It's translating that call into what ministry looks like for you. That is what's rigorous about. I'm not pursuing deacon's orders, but from what I understand of the process.
Right, and if you are pursuing deacon's orders, send us a Facebook message and email.
And help clue me in to
use
to
the
help.
Instagrams.
No, don't Snapchat me. I don't want to know.
You can tout us.
Yeah, if you listen to this show, are a deacon, and are also a fan of wrestling, you can send us a message on Tout, which is a social network we need to get on. It's really hot. It's really blowing up. Tout, I think it's huge. Okay.
Anyway,
this is interesting. I think possibly here's what may be going on. So you phrase it in terms of understand Jesus Christ's lordship. What is that actual language? It's so important. Lordship of Christ for the world. You could make the argument that from their perspective, her being a lesbian is her failure to recognize Jesus' lordship. And that this is a coded way of saying you are not dealing with the sin that's in your life.
Yeah.
Which is to say you don't recognize Christ as Lord, and you are so determined to make your own decisions. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean,
that's one way you could put it, yes.
To me, that's what I hear in that. Now, again, this is coming without explanation.
Yeah, we don't have the transcripts of what was said, and we never will because they're private, right?
As far as I know.
As far as I know, they're private. We don't know what she said. For all we know, she could have out there and said, Jesus is this nice old man with a funny beard who shoots lasers out of his eyes. I assume that was not said, but we don't get this. But there's some inference that we can say is like, you don't, this person does not take Jesus so seriously that she can use the love of Christ to overcome her own human failings, which is her sexuality.
From their perspective.
We got to add that because I don't think it's a sin, because I think if God creates you, God creates you. That's just my opinion, and it's the right one. For me, at least.
Certainly has the weight of evidence behind it.
But yeah, I mean, you can very clearly see that. It's like, if Jesus Christ is the Lord over all humanity, when people come to Christ, then they try to strive away from sin. And this is a sin that, air quotes, sin that she is flaunting.
Sure.
She's air quotes flaunting.
Yeah.
Keep forgetting that we're not always on video. And that proves she doesn't understand or respect what lordship of Jesus Christ is. Until she gets her act together, she's going to have to be deferred.
Right. And so again, it's like saying she's in an active lesbian relationship. All of this seems to me is just code.
Yeah.
And so when she says that her sexuality did not directly come up, to me, in how they responded to her, and given that there's the weirdness that they had refused even to interview her because of her sexuality previously, that clearly there's something else going on here than just what she had written and what she said in that interview. Now, again, I mean, you can't separate your knowledge of that. Like, this is not supposed to be an objective process. This is somewhat an inherently subjective process of what
any interview is. Job interview.
Yeah. And do you think they're suitable for this job? And the Board of Ordained Ministry has effectively said, not yet.
Yeah.
That she needs to clarify how the Lordship of Christ and her internal call, which I am willing to bet it's pretty strong if she has withstood this process.
If she can put up with this crap and still say, no, I'm still called to be a deacon in the United Methodist Church.
Right. I mean, this seems like a remarkable amount of effort.
That's a pretty strong call.
So I have a hard time.
You could just walk up and say, do you see what's happened? There's your call story.
Right. I mean,
it's well articulated.
It's well articulated in that I'm still here. Right? I have a strong sense of call.
God's call is bigger than your church.
Or I could have walked out on this process a long time ago and gotten a lot, it's deacon work, so that it's ministry in the world. And so she could have just done this as not a deacon.
Yeah, she could have just been layperson.
Right. She could have done whatever
Which is what she is doing now.
As a layperson. But no, she clearly feels a strong sense of call to ordination, or she wouldn't still be doing this.
Right.
Look, the ordination process sucks in the best of circumstances. Right. Like, it is a morass. It is awful. It needs to be fixed. Someday, I hope we see some sense and stop, I'll be in this process for like 10 years. And that's ridiculous.
Well, it's designed to, make sure that people like Jim Jones don't get through.
Yeah, but he got kicked out in the first round. There are still 3 other rounds.
Then he went to the Disciples of Christ.
Yep.
And then that happened.
Like, I'm not saying that there doesn't need to be some rigors. I'm just saying, like, it is almost deliberately discouraging.
Right.
But that's a topic for a different day. I mean, the summation of this story is there is clearly something else going on here. I think she is very right to point this out. We're not surprised. I'm just surprised they didn't just kick her out entirely.
Yeah, that's surprising for me too. But I think that stems from the fact that they don't want to seem like the bad guy, which they already are. The bad guy. They are Razor Ramon, to use your wrestling analogy.
They have made a definite heel turn.
They have made a heel turn.
In this, to keep this terrible thing going,
John Cena. That has nothing to do anything.
But I do want to point out something, though, that there are some pretty strong allies around her, particularly her district committee. I mean, she even highlights that in her statement that, they sent her knowing full well her sexuality.
Right.
And they still passed her on to the Board of Ordained Ministry.
Well, they see her more up close than the Board of Ordained Ministry ever will, and if that's the case, they're like, no, she is called, she is going to be a good deacon.
Right. Pass
her through. And it's probably going to happen again, where the district committee is going to say, she still got it, pass her through.
We passed her the first time. It's y'all's problem.
Yeah.
And, I mean, so, in a way, I guess this story goes on.
Yep.
And we will continue to cover it. It's interesting that they have basically chose not to deal. No one has yet been able to officially deal with their sexuality. The Judicial Council did not. They just dealt on administrative matters.
Yeah, it's like, well, we haven't out the administrative matters, and that's what the case was all about. And
now you have her Board of Ordained Ministry also finding
it's a theology matter.
It's a theology matter. It's not a matter of lifestyle. Now, again, you can read their reflections on who she is. They may see it. I don't know if they see it as a lifestyle matter or not, but it's essentially who she is.
Mm-hmm.
Their reflection on who she is and in how they phrase their objection, but they certainly don't overtly say it.
Yeah,
which is just such an interesting and slightly maddening layer that we're having this conversation in code.
Yeah,
like it's this thing we can't talk about. Don't talk about the gays,
even though it's out there all the time on everything because it's who people are, and that's okay.
Now even the NFL draft.
Exactly.
For this week's Stephen Splains.
Stephen Splains manly things this week. Like the NFL draft.
Manly. Very manly.
And boys kissing boys.
Very manly.
And Christian conservatives' reaction to it.
And you always find it strange. It's like, oh, okay, boys kissing boys isn't manly. What are you talking about? It's two men. How do you get anything more manly?
They should be kissing in a steakhouse.
I mean, the only thing more manly, and this was like for the NFL draft, so this only could have been more manly if this had happened in a steakhouse. Men kissing men in a steakhouse during the NFL draft. I mean,
mission accomplished.
Maybe also if professional wrestling was also happening in that steakhouse at the same time, also ninjas. But it is hard to get more manly than what that actually was. This is an entirely side note, but
sexuality is a wonderful mystery, and we need to just
there are only men in this picture.
Exactly. Human sexuality is such a wonderful mystery, and it's just, we've got to be able to just get over ourselves with saying that we know how it should be for everyone. And the thing is, who I'm attracted to is not going to be who other people are attracted to. You just got to find that person that you are attracted to that's attracted to you back, and then next thing you know, you've got a relationship, and it's wonderful.
Yeah.
But I guess that's wrong, so...
Well...
Yeah.
I mean, the argument that always gets used to terrible effect is that slippery slope. Well, what are you going to allow? And it's... Oh, God.
And then it's consenting adults who have the ability to make free choice. You can't, you can't say, well, the goat chose me.
Well,
no.
I mean,
that's what everyone goes to. They did it at General Conference, where it was
did.
no, the next thing that happens is bestiality.
It's no, still no.
Yep.
This is a committed relationship between consenting adults who are expressing love and affection towards each other. To be honest, we need more of that in this world.
Yes.
Not less. And it's just always fascinating how this gets approached as some strange slippery slope or
that if you allow this, you have to allow everything. No, you don't.
No, we're there.
You can have rules in place that say, no, a 5-year-old is not appropriate.
But to me, there is still, Mary was 13. So there's that.
Age of consent in most countries is 14?
Yeah, much lower.
Much lower than here in the United States.
We're at 16 generally.
16 generally, 17 some places.
Yeah. And if I ever have a daughter, 37.
If I have a daughter, she's becoming a nun.
Yeah.
I'm not dealing with that talk.
You better love Jesus. Because, anyways.
That's the fathers in us. When I'm sure if we ever have
daughters, they'll tell us promptly to go to hell. So it really doesn't matter.
And then we'll give them the correct talk, which is...
I study sexual and reproductive health. My children don't stand a chance.
I'm just don't do anything stupid.
I don't really remember where I'm going with this, except... Oh, no, I do.
Sydney doesn't either.
The standards for Christian relationships remain. Monogamy, commitment. Those are, that seems to be what this...
700 concubines.
What this, especially the New Testament language around sex is getting at.
New Testament, that's not the fun one.
Yes, thank you. But if you look at the New Testament approach to sex, and it is vaguely skeptical, but it is still about there being monogamy and commitment. That seems to be the principles, if you want to boil it down, at least the way I boil it down, it's monogamy and commitment.
Yeah.
And homosexuality in modern America is also talking about monogamy and commitment. And we have enough problem with heterosexual monogamy and commitment that I just don't understand how the culture war issue is people who also wish to be monogamous and committed. That seems not what is hurting culture. The proliferation of sexual imagery, like this is ancient Rome, like everywhere is an ancient Roman bathhouse. To me, it seems like a much wider cultural issue.
Yeah.
Speaking of wider cultural issues that are really driving me crazy, it's this week's discussion. So racism
is bad. Thank you for listening tonight.
And that's the show. Thank you so much for listening. Good night. No, so racism. Now, after the election of President Obama, many people began to talk about the post-racist society, which, having lived most of my life in the southern United States, always seemed wildly optimistic. That we are actually living in a post-racial society. Also, unrealistic and impossible, and not necessarily actually what we're going for. Post-racism society, perhaps, but I think cultural differences among ethnic and racial groups in the United States is actually something to be celebrated, because there is unique history and much strength to be taken from that. I'm not actually interested in a post-racial society, maybe a less racist one. Anyways, I digress. We are definitely not in a post-racial or post-racist society. It seems like casual or like overt racism by powerful people has become somewhat of like a media thing. So we have Donald Sterling, erstwhile owner of the
Los Angeles
Clippers, who when I was growing up, were a terrible team. Apparently they're not a terrible team anymore. Which is unfortunate. So
Lakers are pretty bad now.
Which is odd because they used to be like.
But I think that's not the point.
On April 25th, 2014, TMZ Sports released a recording of Sterling with a female friend, who he's been very kind to, where Sterling said this: "It bothers me that a lot of you want to broadcast you're associating with black people," says the man who owns an NBA franchise. "You can sleep with black people, you can bring them in, you can do whatever you want, but the little I ask you is not to bring them to my games." So this was talking about his lady friend had her picture taken with Magic Johnson, the famous basketball Hall of Famer, who is living with HIV and AIDS, and maybe just HIV. I can't ever remember. Does he have full?
I think he's just HIV.
I think he's just HIV positive. I can't. That's actually an important distinction, but I don't remember off the top of my head. And yet, despite his kind of, essentially makes his living off of a group of very athletically capable African-American men, talks about how he doesn't want people he associates with also associating with black people. Now, he responded to this in a, shall we say, unique way. He responded to this, CNN's Anderson Cooper, who I love.
Maybe one day he'll be on a news show.
Yeah. Well, he became famous because he was covering of Katrina, and that thing was for real. Okay, so he claiming that he wasn't a racist, he said, in reference to Magic Johnson, what kind of guy goes to every city, has sex with every girl, and then he catches HIV? Is that someone we want to respect and tell our kids about? I think he should be ashamed of himself. I think he should go into the background. But what does he do for, then these are Sterling's words, the black people? He doesn't do anything. And so on top of Sterling, we have the Nevada rancher who basically had a pitched war with the federal authorities, named Clive Bundy. And I'm not going to read Mr. Bundy's statement because, quite frankly, I don't want to say the words he says. But he essentially implies that African American people may have been better off under slavery because apparently he believes that slavery held their family system intact, which is frankly a lie.
Isn't that the point of slavery, was that they sold the family separate? Part
of it. Yes, and that somehow they were more free under slavery because they weren't dependent on welfare. And actually, I guess there is a quote that people need to hear, and I'll bleep myself if there's specific offensive words. Okay, and because they were basically on government subsidy, so now what do? They abort their children. They put their young men in jail because they never learned how to pick cotton. And I've often wondered, are they better off as slaves, picking cotton and having a family life and doing things? Or are they better off under government subsidy? They didn't get no more freedom. They got less freedom. Yeah, okay. Fantastic. And so some groups distant who had been supporting Bundy, Fox News, distanced themselves from him. Others, many Tea Party groups, kind of rallied around Bundy because he's talking about how the bad government subsidies are on the human character, which that's a different debate, but it's not slavery. This is like the Holocaust defense, right? Nothing's equivalent to the Holocaust, so don't compare anything to the Holocaust. Yes. This is the same thing. Nothing is equal to slavery. Don't compare it to slavery. Nothing is equal to that except actual slavery.
Right.
And so it seems to just be, and some of it's that media has picked up on this, sells whatever they're selling, because most media is just marketing firms. But so what is your perspective on this kind of casual and overt racism that's rising back to the surface after our declaration of the post-racist society?
Oh God, I don't even know. It's one of those, I think it's because now there are certain groups that promote those ideas that are more vocal now.
That's a nice way of putting that.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to say. That is, it's becoming more and more, and I hate to use the term, it's becoming more and more mainstream to hold those beliefs because that's what
I think
gets told.
I think it's always been mainstream. I think it's becoming more mainstream to express
them. Yeah, that's okay. That's a better way to put it. Thank you. It's, you can express them now, and you will always have someone who will pat you on the back and say,
"Yeah, you're just saying what you're just saying what you think.
You're just saying what everyone's already thinking." I personally don't think.
I mean, it's essentially.
I don't think welfare is slavery, and I would like black people to come to basketball games.
Let's be clear, though. This is essentially what Nixon ran on, right? This is this is the same thing as opposing school busing.
Yeah.
It's a way of having segregation without having segregation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we often do this where there's a very few people who speak in this coded language of, oh, it's okay if you do this, this, and this, but it's not okay if you do that. It used to be get married or whatever.
And we're seeing that here in Georgia with some of these ads that are like, who is it? He's the guy who drives the beat up station wagon, who's driving around saying, back in my day, we knew the value of $1, and now we have all these people on welfare, not working for anything. We need to change that. And that's that working, not working on welfare. That means,
okay, yeah. Let's be clear. So with post, I actually know something about this.
Go Trey.
This is not just talking out of my ass. So in a post-welfare reform,
I think it's Jack Kingston.
Post-1996 welfare reform world, generally speaking, people on welfare are actively seeking jobs.
Yeah.
Or actively have jobs. Okay? And
they're called the working poor for a reason.
And also, regardless of race, fundamental to the human spirit is striving and is wanting to not be dependent on government infrastructure. And welfare generally, and there are exceptions that will always get pointed to, and the veracity of some of those you look at and go, I mean, there was like that one woman who had figured out how to game the system, but generally speaking, the people who I know or have known who are on welfare are usually trying to get off of it, or usually like it's the thing that's keeping them alive.
Yeah.
While they're also in this down economy, this ongoing down economy where everything's better for the 1%, who are most of the people making these statements, but it's certainly not better for the 99%.
Right.
Like, the recovery has been wildly uneven, where if you look at Wall Street, they're having record highs.
Unfortunately, a lot of people don't invest in Wall Street because they can't afford it.
Right. And so I look at my community, which is mostly poor white, but still people living at or near the poverty line, and they're still struggling. It's just to find jobs anywhere. So in this down economy, like, it is hard to find jobs, and it's also hard to find sufficient labor. So you can work like 3 minimum wage jobs and still not have enough to feed your family. So if you're working, if you can literally only work 3 minutes, assuming you're working full time, you can only work 3 minimum wage jobs a day.
Yeah.
Because that's 24 hours. So sometimes welfare is just what keeps people alive, and it is not some comfortable life. And from a Christian perspective also, it's not your money.
No.
Like, stop. Like, I hate that the family values ticket is also it's my money.
That's mine, yeah.
You, it's family values, none of it's yours.
Yeah, I grew up in a very poor household, and my mom instilled in me, that's one of the things I always tell Kathleen when she's like, that's your birthday money, or that's your, your church the paycheck you get from church that, you can, you use that. I said, my mama always taught me that anytime you got a blessing, you had to be a blessing to others. And I think, and that's always stuck with me. So my bootstraps, I'm going to say, were sufficiently longer than most because of who I am with my skin color and my gender. Yes, Princeton privilege guy. There's different types of privilege. Being poor, not a privilege. Being white and male, privileged. Anywho, but now that I am,
you had some structural privileges.
Yeah, I have some structural privileges. Yeah, but I'm at the point where I'm like, I can help others. I can be a blessing to others, and that's a very base understanding of what I think God calls us to do. And
so the argument that gets made is, well, we want to give that money to private charities, which if you actually look at the numbers, it ends up not being the same. Also, that's wildly inefficient.
Yep.
What is efficient is to have a single payer system where you pay the money into one pot and they figure out how to do that, rather than having a little bit of money going to hundreds of different pots and all kinds of holes getting left out.
Yeah.
What makes sense is to, I think this is from Michael Walzer's book, Spheres of Justice, but don't quote me on that. I read this a long time ago. So to pull the actual plot... Yeah, okay, it is Walzer, and it is Spheres of Justice. Okay, I'm looking over at my shelf in the political philosophy section, which is over your shoulder, Stephen.
That says Italian. The other one says Polish.
That's underneath there. There's Spheres of Justice by Michael Walzer. And so what makes sense is to have that one large pot to pay into. It's what makes sense for healthcare, and it's what makes sense for welfare. To support people and help give them a leg up. Because it is really hard to get a job if you're starving. And it's really hard to keep a job if you're starving. Yeah. And it's really hard to get a job if you don't have a place to shower, and don't have a place to wash your clothes, and don't have a place to sleep. The human body can only do so much, and it needs some basic needs to be met. And there's not a whole lot of capitalist money to be made in providing adequate housing for poor people, or, finding a way to have healthy food be cheap.
And readily available when you don't have a car.
And readily available when you don't have a car in a food desert. And so there's a lot of just things that need to happen. And, I mean, we're kind of wandering off of the racism angle, but often the racism and the classism get blended together.
Very much so, because if you're poor, you're going to be a different color skin than I am.
Right.
Because I'm middle class. Why can't everyone else be? It must be because they're lazy. It
everyone
must be
else,
because,
yeah. And it's one of the things that I always talk about is the idea of a safety net.
Yeah.
So if I make a piss poor financial decision, which I often do, I have a safety net that my parents will, begrudgingly, but they'll, more or less begrudgingly, but they'll bail me out if I'm ever really in serious trouble. What a lot of people who grow up in poverty don't have is that safety net.
Right.
So if they make a mistake, they're destitute. And we all make mistakes. I've made plenty of financial mistakes in my life. I've just had a safety net to bail me out. And the only difference isn't intelligence or effort or, sometimes even education, but that's tied into economics as well. But really the only difference between me and a person in homelessness is that I have a safety net that they didn't have. And so I was privileged with a safety net. It has nothing to do with my effort. Mm-hmm. Most of the people that I've met who living in homelessness or living in poverty, extremely hardworking, extremely competent, probably, kinder to their neighbors than I am, all of these things. There are some people who fit the stereotype, no doubt. But the most, especially in this economy, most of the people who are ending up in homelessness are family units with educated adult parents. Mm-hmm. Right? Think about that. There just aren't the jobs. There isn't the social safety net. And what welfare is supposed to be is a social safety net. So that other people who didn't grow up in the family that I did can also have something to protect them from one that we all make mistakes. Because we all make them. Right? Mm-hmm. But some of us don't have to pay for our mistakes, and some people pay dearly for them. And what welfare tries to do is try to level that playing field, saying, okay, we're all going to make mistakes, or bad things are just going to happen. You're going to get laid off, not because you weren't a hard worker, but because
business reasons.
Because business reasons.
Because you have to create more jobs, and how do you create more jobs? By getting rid of
other jobs.
Getting rid of other jobs.
The treadmill. So it's not as simple as lazy or what that they'd be better off in slavery.
Or I don't want them here because they give off a bad image for the LA Clippers.
The
LA Clippers are a bad image because they stink.
LA Clippers, bad image. B, I think basketball is a chance to be something positive in any community, right? It's about we're all rooting for the same team. Everyone
in the white, black,
red and yellow, black and white, and the
are in that arena cheering.
Right.
And it doesn't matter where you're sitting. When you leave, you're going to be high fiving people because the Clippers won,
right?
Or you're going to be like
flipping cars because it's LA and the Clippers won.
Son of a biscuit. But you won't say biscuit because the Clippers lost to the.
Right.
I think they're playing the Thunder. Maybe?
Look, don't look at me. I don't. Ever since the Rockets won the championship in 1994, I haven't really 95. I haven't really paid attention since then. It's been about 20 years since I paid attention to
Hawks
basketball.
haven't won ever. Anywho,
Hakeem Olajuwon. Once we got Steve Francis, I just really lost interest.
Not in my house. That's Dikembe Mutombo.
That's Dikembe Mutombo, which also best name in basketball ever. Dikembe Mutombo. So, we're talking around in circles as we always do. So we should probably get out of here.
That means it's time to go when we mentioned Dikembe Mutombo.
Yeah, and Steve Francis and Hakeem Olajuwon, who I thought was the best player ever. If you have any feedback for the show, not about basketball, send boldly at nfear.org, facebook.com/the Sign Your Name Project, or at Sin Boldly on Twitter. And go in peace to love and serve the Lord and end fear by signing your name. Good night.
You know my friend Courtney?
Yeah?
She had the door held for her by Charles Barkley at Neighbors.
I don't really know where to go with that.
Exactly.
Also former Houston Rocket, Charles Barkley.
And Phoenix Sun and Philadelphia 76er.
Yeah. But he played for Houston for a while.
Remember Muggsy Bogues?
I remember the name.
Or Spud Webb. Spud Webb won the dunk contest twice, and he was 5'4" or something like that.
Jeez.
Basketball Jones.